Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. As we always try to make clear, this show has a single purpose: holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And since our last show, the need for accountability in law enforcement, and more importantly, the entire system of governance which enables it, has never been more clear. But before I get started, I need to ask for your support. Programs like PAR can't survive and thrive without viewers like you. So please, if you can, make sure you subscribe and like, and consider clicking on the donate link at the top of the comments section to become a sustainer. And of course, share with us your tips about police misconduct so we can investigate for you. Email your tips privately to par@therealnews.com. We appreciate each and every one of you who support our show, because we can't do this without you. Now, like I said, holding police accountable has never been more important. That's because recently we have obtained some intriguing evidence from a case involving one of our favorite guests, Otto the Watchdog. It's a 911 call that makes Texas law enforcement look even worse as they entangle Otto with endless and costly legal proceedings. But the evidence also raises critical questions about a phenomenon we've been tracking for over a year: rural over-policing. Remember, contrary to conventional wisdom, the vast tendrils of American policing have been growing more rapidly in rural America than in big cities. In fact, as this chart shows, mass incarceration is growing fastest in the least populated areas of the country. Meanwhile, imprisonment is actually dropping in major metropolitan areas. And this is a trend we have seen firsthand on the show, as we have reported on police overreach across the country. Again and again, through stories of cop watchers and citizens, we have documented cases in small towns that show the consequences of this unchecked growth. We've encountered police departments whose staff almost outnumbered the crimes committed in the communities they purport to serve. And time again, this overreach of policing leads to bad arrests, horrific consequences for its victims, and ultimately bad public policy. Adding to that growing litany of this expansion of policing is a 911 call we have obtained that led to the arrest of Otto. As you're about to hear, Otto had been forced to return to Royce, Texas to face charges stemming from this: holding a sign that some residents of Royce, Texas found offensive. Now, setting aside the glaring constitutional issues for arresting a man for exercising the most basic of First Amendment rights, it's important that we examine Otto's case in light of the theme of the show, particularly the call that led up to his most recent arrest and the chain of troubling consequences for Otto that have occurred since. First, just to set the stage a bit, Otto was camping with his children in Royce City because he had been forced to return to battle the charges over the heinous crime of holding a sign. But then another citizen of Royce City decided Otto was a dangerous criminal whose behavior warranted that police intervene again. Let's listen.
There is a man living in a pop-up camper with two little kids with no electricity and no water. I don't know what's going on. I know it's dark now and he doesn't have any electricity, but is there some way maybe some officers can get out there and see if they can see him and maybe talk to him or something?
The 911 call led to this encounter: police confronting Otto and terrifying his children. And to continue exploring what happened and why, I'm joined by the man himself, Otto the Watchdog. Otto, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So Otto, first, just so we understand, could you explain why you were camped out in the park and what prompted you to be there?
Well, it started about 2 years ago. I had the idea to protest the police in my local area, and as a result, I got a disorderly conduct ticket, the arrest that you've covered on the show before. So I was coming into town for that. I moved out of state, all that kind of stuff, and it was just it got into a point where I really couldn't afford a hotel anymore. The expenses of traveling and existing that way, it was getting expensive. So I've been camping a lot. We didn't really have a problem with it. We've been on a summer-long camping adventure going all the way around Colorado already. So one more night in the camper wasn't that big of a deal. At least it didn't seem like it. It shouldn't have been a big deal, but it ended up being one.
Now, if you don't mind, Please walk us through what happened when police arrived. Why did the police show up to your camper? How did the encounter proceed?
So of course I didn't know anything. I didn't know why when they first showed up, and I had seen something happening behind me, like off in the distance, and I thought that it was police activity, but I didn't really know for sure. And then when I saw lights in front of me, I thought that it might have something to do with what was happening behind me. As being as paranoid as I am about being in this town, with as many times as the police have messed with me before, knowing that I'm coming to court and everything else like that, I thought that they might be police. Uh, so when they came up on me, and it was completely dark and I couldn't see anything, and I thought that if they were police, that they would eventually turn their overhead lights on, which they didn't. And because they didn't turn their lights on, I wasn't actually sure that they were police. So I didn't know why or who these people were. And by the time I figured it out, it took a long time to understand why they were even there to begin with. And of course, it started with they got a call.
It sounds like your children were terrified. Tell us what happened. It seems to me that police pointing guns at your children put them in much greater danger than a single dad going camping.
So what happened next? They ordered me out of the vehicle and put me in handcuffs, and didn't like that I was asking questions. So they kept me in the back of the squad car for an hour and a half as they did everything that you see in the video, trying to figure out what they could charge me with, instead of trying to figure out whether or not there was something wrong, or if if it's a welfare check, usually they like, hey, is everything okay, right? And then if everything's fine, then they leave. But this wasn't that. They were looking for something to take me to jail for, and despite all the evidence against what they were proposing as the alleged crime, um, they went with it anyway.
Now, this case has not only exacted a heavy emotional toll, but has enacted a steep financial toll on you. Can you talk about it?
Well, the financial cost is pretty bad. The emotional toll is far worse, not just on me, but also specifically on the kids. I it was 50. I recently got to see the kids again, but that was 15 months in the making. So for the last 15 months, the children have been separated from their dad, and I was the daddy. So that was pretty bad. Financially, they issued a $65,000 bond for this case. Now, interesting point on the amount of the bond. The Rockwall City Councilman was arrested for possession and distribution of child pornography, and he got a $50,000 bond. Actually, I think it may have been 40,000. I'm not real sure on the numbers, but it was less than mine, which kind of upset me. Also, I'm on an ankle monitor, a GPS ankle monitor, things that are usually done for sex offenders and things of that sort. And that cost me personally $300 every single month. If I go anywhere that's outside of cell phone range, it's a violation of a bond. If I forget to charge it, it's a violation of bond, and I could lose that $65,000. We could have gone to a bondsman to post the $65,000 as a surety bond, which is actually just 10% of the actual full 65,000. But apparently, the local bonds companies, who are on a very short list of companies who are allowed to post bonds in the Rockwall County system, don't like me, specifically because I'm a cop hater, which is untrue. I don't hate police. I hate bad cops, not just bad cops, but bad government in general. And there's a lot of that. So because the police arrested me, and now I have this huge bond, $65,000 is a lot of money. I've currently spent $4,000 on GPS monitoring, and probably $8,000 to $10,000 on travel, going back and forth to court, which somehow always gets buggered up.
So other people have reached out to you about the Royce City Police Department, and you have filed to get access to complaint against these officers. Can you share some of what you've learned or share how you've been blocked from investigating the department?
Oh my goodness, Haya, I would love to tell you all the things that I've learned from my open records request to Royce City. And I would start with by saying it's damn near impossible to get records out of the government. Open records are extremely difficult. I've been fighting for 2 years to get these body cams. 2 years. We had to take it all the way up to the Attorney General's office and get and get them to tell the city that they have to provide just basic records like pace, how much they get paid and things of that sort, how many employees they have and what they make and things like that. Unfortunately, since I filed a civil lawsuit against these particular officers, and this and other officers in town for the sign case and others. Now the Attorney General says, well, you don't have to release their complaints made against these officers because there's a civil litigation pending. So now because I'm suing them, now I can't get the records because I'm suing them. But before I was suing them, I couldn't get the records because I didn't have, I didn't put my address on it, or they whatever it was. They said that there wasn't any records responsive on some of them, which I know is false because now I have them. It's very frustrating, and everything you do is extremely difficult and takes a long time.
But what happened to Otto is not where the story ends. That's because since his run-ins with Royce City Police, we have, by examining some intriguing data about the city's law enforcement strategies, shed some light on the evolving theme of this show, over-policing. And to help me parse it, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Tay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, first, as you've done before, you reviewed 911 call data from the Royce City Police Department regarding suspicious people. Tell us about it.
Well, it's amazing because, obviously Royce City Police don't have much to do. When we looked at the 911 calls, it was amazing. 20% of them, roughly, on a yearly basis, are just for suspicious persons with no resolution. The rest, a lot of them are just 911 alarm calls, stuff like that. So it's really not very important stuff. But I think what's most interesting is this obsession that the people in Royce City have with suspicious people.
Now, as we often do on this show, we like to give bad policing a conceptual framework. That is, discuss the underlying imperative that makes bad policing beneficial to the system which bolsters it. How would you categorize what is happening to Otto and what you're seeing in Royce, Texas?
Well, this is a classic case of what we call social boundary policing, right? Someone just doesn't like how someone looks or how they behave or what they're doing or how they choose to spend their time, and they decide to have the police, law enforcement intervene, which I think is exemplar of how law enforcement has become insinuated in every aspect of our civic life, not as something to enforce the law, but to enforce social boundaries. And that's what we call social boundary policing.
So I also wanted to check on some stories we've been following in other parts of the country and some legal requests you filed for information. What can you tell us?
Well, Tay, there are two stories we're following up with legal requests for information. One is in Denton, Texas, where Randall Lee Thompson was pulled over by police after he bought a car at police auction, and they arrested him for what's in it. We have been trying to get a hold of the police budget there, how much they spend or how much they earn on tickets, how much revenue they bring in, how much they pay police officers, how much overtime they spend. This wasn't in the budget detail on the website, so we filed a formal request for this information and have not heard back. The second case is a case in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where a young woman was bit by a police dog. We wanted to know some very specific details. How many police dog encounters are there per year? What are the guidelines for use of force? Do police officers who use a dog to bite someone have to file a use of force report? And of course, the justification for using the dogs in the first place. So far, we have not heard back, but we will file those requests. We will follow up on them. And when we hear from them, we will report back to you.
I'm sure some of you watching the show are now asking a reasonable question. Why do we keep focusing on policing? And why do we spend so much time recounting the travails of cop watchers like Otto the Watchdog? And really, who cares if some small towns spend too much money on policing and give a few overzealous officers the power to unjustly ruin people's lives? And I mean, really, isn't there something more important to cover? Well, that's a good question, and please let me answer. First, First, I want to start with a little coverage of some current policy achievements in the US and use them to point out why over-policing is so problematic for this country, if not an existential threat. It's a little list of what I've developed that I call what we're good at and what we're not. It will be a quick study in contrast that will show, not tell you, why our massive investment in law enforcement affects our lives in ways often unseen and often unacknowledged. Let's start with a current policy problem that shows what we're bad at: distributing vaccines to people during a deadly pandemic. Despite the fact that roughly 4,000 Americans are dying every day due to COVID-19, most states have only administered roughly 25% of the vaccines they received. And at the current rate of vaccination, it would take years to inoculate every single American. And now let's contrast that with something the federal government seems quite adept to handle: distributing military equipment to the police. Since the 1990s, the US military, through a program known as 1033, has doled out excess military equipment at an impressive clip. In fact, in just the past decade, they managed to deliver 1,000 MRAPs. What are they? Mine-resistant ambush vehicles used for close combat in war zones. In total, this program offloaded $7 billion worth of military gear, which, incidentally, this study found leads to more aggressive use of police force. What are we similarly bad at? Keeping our people healthy. Despite paying more per capita for healthcare than any other country in the world, we have some of the shortest life expectancies of any similarly situated wealthy country. And on top of that mind-boggling achievement, we are the only wealthy nation that allows people to go bankrupt when they get sick. And next, what are we good at? Mass incarceration. America remains the most voracious jailer of people, not just in the world, but in the history of civilization. The roughly 2 million people locked up in the US represent 25% of the world's inmates, despite the fact we have roughly 5% of the world's population. What are we bad at? Providing a safety net for millions of workers who've been devastated by a historic pandemic. Let's remember that despite the recent stimulus check of $600, it took Congress almost 8 months to pass a new round of aid for the American people. Despite the fact that 10 million Americans are currently unemployed and hundreds of thousands join the rolls of the unemployed every week, the US government sat on their collective hands. What are we good at? Subverting the Constitution through civil asset forfeiture. Police seize billions of dollars worth of property from innocent citizens who have never been convicted of a crime. These so-called spoils of war are taken without due process, undermining the basic principles of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, which is supposed to protect us from unreasonable searches and seizures. What are we good at? Funding generous police pensions. As we reported on a previous PAR, 10 cities with the largest police departments had set aside a whopping $75 billion for cop pensions alone. Many departments allow police to retire after only 20 years of work with a lifetime guarantee of 2/3 of their salary for the rest of their lives. What are we bad at? Funding Social Security, or simply put, pensions for the rest of us. Let's not forget, a recent audit of the Social Security system by the Wharton School of Business found that the system, which provides a safety net for the nation's elderly, will run out of cash in just 12 years, 2032. That's just 12 years when it won't be able to pay out benefits promised to generations of Americans. The point is, the aforementioned examples illustrate how the priorities of this country to punish, imprison, and monetize that process affects other aspects of our lives. That bad policing is not just a problem for people swept up in it, but it is for all of us. An example of how a country that prioritizes cruelty over compassion and vengeance over justice cannot fix the existential dangers that confront all of us. I mean, I get it. It's easy to write off the story of people like Otto, to categorize his entanglement with law enforcement as his fault, that he should not have exercised his First Amendment rights in the first place, or upset the contingent of Royce, Texas Karens who appeared to have law enforcement on speed dial. I mean, why should we care about cop watchers or the thousands of people arrested for petty crimes, forced to pay exorbitant bails, or made to work in prison for 70 cents an hour so major corporations can rake even more obscene profits and avoid paying a living wage. But we can't. We shouldn't. Injustice is a contagion. It spreads like a disease, cropping up in one place and ending in another. By now, all of us should be familiar with that model, right? The point is, like a virus that infects all of us, all the aforementioned examples prove by allowing any group to have an unfair advantage or profit off of misery, we infect the entire system. By allowing special pricey pensions for cops, absolute power over life and death, to seize property and freedom, we corrupt the other institutions who become beset by the same disease of communicable cruelty. That's why we should all care, and that's why we will continue to hold police accountable. I'd like to thank Otto the Watchdog for joining us today and sharing his experience with the Royce City Police Department.
I thank you for sharing it. Maybe we can get something done and fix this.
And I'd like to thank intrepid reporter Stephen Janis for his editing, his research, and his help with this piece. Thank you, Stephen.
Tay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I have to thank friend of the show, Noli D. Thanks, Noli D. And I want you watching at home to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please email us your tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us on Facebook or Instagram at Police Accountability Report or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Tejas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like, share, and comment. You know I read your comments and appreciate them, and I try to answer your questions whenever I can. My name is Taya Graham, and I am your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.